This is something that I should have made a long time ago. Whether in video format as you're seeing now, a post on one of the few social media platforms I bothered to use to keep everyone who followed my content up to speed on whatever was going on with me and any projects I was working on, or literally anything else that I could have quickly and sufficiently explained to all of you what was going on with me around the time I vanished from YouTube and various other platforms for as long as I have. I'm not here to make any excuses for myself, nor do I wish to elicit any form of sympathy from anyone with any of the details that I'm going to share with any of my viewers, who may still be around and are watching this video right now. My primary goals are to provide these people a long overdue explanation for my prolonged absence, as well as an apology for how I handled my sudden hiatus. How any of you choose to react to what I say here is entirely up to you. You are entitled to feel how you want to feel about this, regardless of my own feelings on the matter. If you're willing to listen to this whole thing, then I will try my best to be as honest about everything as I can be, save for sharing certain personal details that could be used to identify individuals tied to me, whose identities I wish to keep private, along with other bits of personal information about myself that I also wish to keep private. As a result, there will be parts of this whole thing where I'll have to come across as intentionally vague. I want to keep the information I want to share relevant to the main topics, and no one needs to hear about all the details of my personal life anyway. So without further ado, here goes nothing. Around the time I was about to finish the production of the finale of Chapter 8 of Higurashi When They Cry Kai, and Part 24 of The Devil on G-String, my personal life rapidly fell apart in various ways. It was already undergoing a lot of troubles behind the scenes that I tried my best to keep as private as I could, but things truly came to a head around this specific point in time. The severity and volume of what I was hit with at this point in time, coupled with everything that had been building up to that point, shocked me to such an extent that my already declining mental health at the time effectively nosedived. And before the first week of what ended up from that point onward becoming a year-long saga had passed, I was barely able to function outside of working my day job and doing what I felt I needed to do to survive my rapidly deteriorating personal life on a day-by-day basis. There were long stretches of time to where I was literally incapable of thinking about any long-term plans for myself in most subjects, because it seemed to me that every time I began to think I could get a something resembling stability, so I could try and work on said plans, something would quickly come and effectively torpedo these attempts right out of the water, with the things that would derail me usually coming from the same sources that helped spawn the state of affairs to begin with. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To add some additional context to the beginning of this whole affair, I was in a romantic relationship at the time. My first one, and so far only one that I've had since I was a kid in high school that lasted near 11 years at the time. Was being the key word here. Around the time I was working on the aforementioned videos on Higurashi and The Devil on G-String, my relationship with my ex began to reach a breaking point. As I previously mentioned, I was already going through a lot of other issues around this time, so I was admittedly already in a pretty fragile state of mind to begin with. Up until that point, I'd been able to hold myself together until I was able to either spend time with my former significant other or engage in work and hobbies that I found more enjoyable and stimulating in my day job, such as my work on my YouTube channel. I admit that there were plenty of days leading up to the finale of Higurashi Chapter 8 and Part 24 of The Devil on G-String to where I was deeply depressed over my personal life, but once I started recording footage for videos, I'd started to feel more like myself. Usually a short while into making the first video of whatever days I was able to squeeze in time to record. I had very few outlets to handle my accumulating stress, and my work on YouTube became one of them by this point. And though there were times to where it was challenging to output both the quantity and quality of work that I was pumping out on a regular basis around this time, my work on YouTube gave me some structure in my life that I felt I had some degree of actual control over, which was something I felt on some level I was beginning to lose almost everywhere else over time, more than I was willing to admit to myself back then. Rather than deal with a failing relationship that I was feeling ever more powerless in my ability to fix, let alone be fully honest with myself over the actual state of it leading up to its dissolution, I instead tried to take my mind off my troubles by focusing on my day job and YouTube videos. In retrospect, I'd say this isn't exactly what I would classify as the healthiest action one could take in this set of circumstances. But in my mind, there was nothing else I could do but try and wait out the encroaching storm that was approaching me. Just to clarify, this isn't me saying that I saw my work on YouTube as anything more than a coping mechanism at this point. I initially started my YouTube channel because I legitimately wanted to try my hand at a form of content creation I thought might prove fun for me to do so, even if it wasn't groundbreaking by any stretch of the imagination. It was Let's Plays, after all. And that initial goal of mine stayed consistent the whole time I was making videos, no matter how good or bad my personal life was at any point I was doing it. Indeed, come the later half of my blind Let's Play of Higurashi, when I began to experiment more and more, I was beginning to develop a sense of pride for my growing skill in video production. I've always had a creative, artistic side to myself that I've often criminally neglected all my life up till that point, and what I was doing to my video production gave me the perfect opportunity to show that sliver of that side of myself to other people. To see myself producing things of quality that I felt was able to match what channels much larger than my own could put out at the time made me feel quite good about myself. But the thing is, this didn't change the fact that, at the end of the day, no matter how much effort I put into it, or how good it made me feel at times, my YouTube channel became something I was, at least in part, using as a form of escapism from aspects of my personal life that I felt that I didn't, or couldn't properly address. This reality would always haunt me in the back of my mind, but just as I mentioned, I pressed on anyway, hoping that whatever personal issues I was facing would eventually be resolved, one way or another. But my relationship with my ex continued to worsen despite my best efforts to try and address it, and other additional problems that tied back into this began to pile on top of everything else, and in my desperation I made the decision to abruptly stop work on my videos, and devote all my spare time into trying to fix all these problems. I reached a point in my mind to where I felt at the time that if I couldn't fix all these problems, then it wouldn't matter what I did after that point. Because there were very few things and people that I had left in my life that I truly cherished. And to lose all of that when I felt that there had to have been something I could have done to help with it all, would have dealt an even bigger blow to me than if I were to lose all those things for any other reason, even though the very idea of losing these things at all absolutely terrified me. There was a problem with this line of thinking, however, and maybe you can already see it. For better or worse, I've always been the sort of person who strives to always try and keep the bigger picture in perspective wherever I could. So whenever I found myself faced with a life decision of any sort, big or small, I would always stop and think, okay, how would these decisions affect every single person in your life, from your close friends and family to various acquaintances and the like? So when it came time for me to make the decision to abruptly stop working on my videos, I took a brief period of time to consider my audiences on YouTube and BitChute. Around all the time this stuff that I was going through in my personal life started to go seriously downhill, I was very much aware of the fact that, at least from my perspective, I was already on shaky grounds with my audience regarding my personal life constantly interfering with my work in some manner or another. And this bothered me considerably each time it happened, not only because I hated the idea of disappointing various members of my audience, but more importantly, I hated the idea of violating the trust other people may have placed in me. In the case of my presence in content creation, I didn't want my audience to feel that I was lying to them about the reasons why I was taking so many sudden breaks at the time, even though I also knew that the most I ever did up till this point was withhold a few details of my personal life that I wished to keep private. But I couldn't help but worry about this sort of thing every time it happened, because I would think about what it was like for me as an audience member who followed content creators that I used to greatly respect, until they either lost their way, or outed themselves to be two-faced liars of some kind, that merely wanted to take advantage of the trust that their viewers had in them. And the idea of doing anything close to that to my own audience, even if it was entirely unintentional on my part, bothered me considerably. My general thought process at this point could be summed up as follows. You're starting to make a habit out of taking these abrupt breaks. It doesn't matter whatever reasons you may have for doing them, because at the end of the day, people come to you to be entertained. And up till recently, you worked hard to keep a good work ethic, because you know that people value reliability in content creators. That, and integrity. You also value these things in the content creators you follow. When people feel like they're being repeatedly lied to by content creators they follow, being taken advantage by them, whatever, their audience won't just take that line down. They'll make their feelings clear one way or another, whether the content creator likes it or not. You yourself know what it's like to be in the position of such audiences who've been in such positions. How it made you feel each time and every time it happened. If you keep taking all these abrupt breaks, then sooner or later, people are going to start asking questions about your own integrity as a content creator, and they'll have every right to, especially as you keep doing it more and more. Can you really afford to keep disappointing them all like this? Why should they even care about whatever problems you're going through that are causing all these breaks in the first place? Your problems are not their problems. If anything, some of them will likely come to you and the stuff you make to temporarily escape from their problems. So why add to their stress by bringing your own personal drama into the equation? Either get your shit together, or start asking yourself whether or not it's even worth it for you to keep doing content creation outright. Dramatic, isn't it? But that's honestly where my thought process was. I didn't have anyone else in my life I could talk to about all my personal problems to their fullest extent, or how they were truly affecting me as a whole. I felt utterly alone, and had to effectively suffer in silence. Until the mental anguish and fear my problems were causing me started to become unbearable, and eventually sent me into a panic. So I thus answered to myself, no, I can't afford to keep doing this. I need to get my own house in order before I can even think of continuing YouTube. The thing is, though, I knew there were some smart people in my audience, as small as it was. And I knew that just about all of you could likely sense if something was seriously wrong with me, if I tried to keep going as I was, even as my own mental health began to seriously deteriorate. I never thought of any of you as stupid. I understood that most human communication lies outside of spoken or written words, and is instead mostly conveyed through either body language, or whatever emotions are conveyed through your face, or voice. And try as I might, I've never been good at faking emotions I honestly can't feel in any given moment, or at least that's how I've always felt about myself. I knew that, sooner or later, the cracks in whatever shoddy mask I'd make for myself would start to crack, and the most observant among you would notice. And I knew full well at least a good chunk of you came to me thinking of me as someone who was more honest than a lot of other content creators out there at the time. So in my mind, it would feel like I'd be lying to you if I faked however I was really feeling the whole way through. And that thought seriously bothered me. It was at the point to where I was contemplating all of this, on top of the aforementioned personal problems, that I just finally cracked. I completely and utterly cracked. And just like that, I stopped all work on video production and cut myself off YouTube, BitChute, and nearly any other platform that anyone could use to reach me, all the while saying to myself whatever I needed to say that was in service of my then primary goal, to justify to myself the actions I was taking. Because I felt that if I could get my personal life back in order, then regardless of whether or not I can salvage what I had built on YouTube later, I can at least have the peace of mind knowing that when shit hit the fan, I focused on the things in my life I felt were more important to me than anything else. Things that I felt were irreplaceable. Thinking of it like that, it became easier for me to ignore the guilt I felt in suddenly leaving my audiences on YouTube and BitChute in the dust, with zero explanation whatsoever. You're under enough stress as it is, and you've already did something like this several times already. Do you really think people want to keep hearing your excuses indefinitely? You can't keep testing their patience forever. Furthermore, you honestly don't know when things in your life will truly stabilize, so taking more gambles with your YouTube thing would be absolutely foolish at this point. And I just listened to that voice, because it was the only one in my life that was speaking to me that alleviated whatever guilt I felt, and not only what I was doing, but in how I went about it too. I had to focus all my attention on something else besides that guilty feeling. Otherwise, more holes would appear in the sinking ship I was riding in. Spend as much time on my personal problems as I needed to, until I felt absolutely certain that the peace was well and truly restored in my life. On all fronts. Days passed. Then days turned into weeks. And so on. And before I knew it, the initial anxiety I felt in ignoring YouTube and the audience I left behind without a single word gradually lessened over time. But the most ironic part in all this is that my decision to ignore everything else in my life, to focus on my romantic relationship and whatever else I felt was wrong with my personal life at the time, and all the effort I had put into these things from that point onward, had ultimately ended up all amounting to nothing in the end. Because mere weeks leading up to what would have been my 11th anniversary with my ex pulled me aside shortly after I got home after a tiring day of work at my day job to tell me that they were breaking up with me. I was told there had been nothing wrong I had done on my end, but rather it was a lack of compatibility between us. I couldn't process what I was hearing at first. That whole moment felt like something straight out of a dream. It didn't feel real to me. I couldn't understand the reasoning I was being given, no matter how much I thought it over that day. When it was made clear to me that they weren't joking, and that there was absolutely nothing that I could do to talk them out of it. My world as I knew it at that point had shattered before my eyes. We were in a committed relationship for nearly 11 years at that point, and we initially started dating when we were in high school, when we were both just kids. We were each other's first loves, and we had what felt to me to be a strong and loving relationship, one that I felt was so ingrained in my life that I couldn't imagine life without it. To say that I was caught completely off guard that day by both their desire to break up with me altogether, and for the reasoning they were giving me, would be a massive understatement. I tried bargaining with them, reasoning with them, trying to make sense of the whole situation, even though I was in a blind panic by that point. But I ended up sleeping alone that night, with nothing but a broken heart. From that point on, I felt nothing but the worst emotional pain that I had ever experienced in my life. Every waking moment was spent feeling absolute misery over my new situation, and it was all I could do to keep going through my daily life and continue working my day job without drawing too much attention to myself due to the sheer grief I was going through. The only peace I had for several weeks after the breakup was whenever I was finally able to go to sleep at night, which proved difficult since I had trouble going to sleep due to the fact that this new development in my life resulted in me sleeping alone every single night. And that forced me to think about the whole situation repeatedly, and for the first few weeks, it would never fail to drive me to tears. The first week or so was so bad that I literally cried myself to sleep every night. I lost a lot of sleep. I had never gone through a breakup before, so having my heart broken was an entirely new experience for me. I had no prior experience earlier in my life to compare it to, and the pain worsened when I realized that this development would change the entire course of my life, regardless of whether I wanted it to or not. A huge chunk of my life goals and dreams I had spent years working towards up to that point had gone up in smoke, and I was suddenly left with no clear direction to go in my life, and whatever support and resources I still had was beginning to shrink. My relationship ending created a snowball effect that began to negatively affect every other aspect of my life, often in ways I didn't see coming, and only added on to what I was already going through by this point. I'm no stranger to misery and hardship. I had my fair share of both during parts of my early childhood, my teenage years, and even my early adult life. But to me, this was something else. The rug was completely pulled out from under me, and ended up creating a domino effect on a scale neither I nor most of anyone who knew what was going on with me saw coming. And things just continued to keep piling on one after another. Long story short, I found myself in a position to where I was increasingly being forced to fend for myself, regardless of whether I had the resources, support network, whatever, to help me survive month to month as time went on. And all because people who I had considered a second family at that time had deemed me resourceful enough at fending for myself, despite the sudden and drastic changes that were going on in my life, than I actually was, especially in an economy that, at the time, was growing increasingly worse in my country at an alarming rate for everyone, even then. And everyone knew that it would continue to worsen, regardless of what I decided to do to try and work around this particular problem. With no other friends and family in my immediate area that I could truly rely on for any serious support, in case shit hit the fan for me even more than it already was. There's more to living on your own besides buying yourself groceries, paying rent, paying utilities, and other such things. A lot more. But this is a topic for a wholly different, unrelated discussion. Being faced with this grim reality, the following 6 months after the breakup happened had put me into the worst depression that I had ever experienced in my life up until that point. The level of pain and anxiety I felt during this time was so severe, I honestly wanted nothing more than to just die in my sleep nearly every time I went to bed, or get killed through some freak accident that would end me instantly. I wish that was an exaggeration, but it's not. For 6 months I saw no way out, no way to realistically save myself from very likely ending up on the streets, losing what little else I had left at that point. It looked like I was going to lose absolutely everything that I valued, and that the options I had to prevent that from happening were disappearing one after the other. I had spent many hours of each of those days and nights contemplating suicide, and the two main reasons I didn't go through with trying to off myself somehow was the fact that I knew that my death would only hurt the people I had left in my life who loved me, and the blind faith that maybe, just maybe, a miracle would occur that would give me an opportunity to save myself from what felt like almost certain doom. I did everything in my power to keep these things in the back of my mind at all times, and pressed on, day after day, working towards an uncertain future for myself with no end goal anywhere in sight. I had effectively lost control of my life, and whenever I felt that new problems stopped piling on long enough for me to get my bearings and start making a new plan of attack on how to tackle them, something else quickly came along and would throw a wrench in things, which typically resulted in goalposts being moved, and an even hotter fire being lit underneath me in an attempt to hurry me further along regardless of whether I was ready to put my foot on the accelerator or not. Since I was into full-blown survival mode at this point in time, I began changing a lot of my daily routine and habits around in such a way to help me manage my stress as best I could. So time I had originally spent working on video production ended up going into other activities. Anything harmless that I felt served as a good distraction from all the elements in my life that I couldn't control. There was also my day job, which I still had, and also used to distract myself from the problems as best I could. Planning my weekly schedule out to incorporate all this new free time soon left me with a lifestyle that had left me with very little time to spend by myself at home, so naturally this ended up cutting significantly into whatever time I used to have to create as much video content as I did back when I was at my most productive on my channels, and pretty much anything else I could do in the comfort of my own home. But all these new things I started doing gave me a form of structure that I had some degree of control over, something which I desperately needed in my life at that point, more than anything. So getting myself to deviate from them for any reason often proved very difficult for me. even for things that I knew, in the back of my mind, I shouldn't keep putting off. Which brings me into discussing the last problem I was facing that kept me from getting back into any kind of video production. The fear and lack of drive I felt in having to own up to having completely abandoned my audiences on YouTube and BitChute for as long as I did, without so much as a single peep from me explaining myself to anyone. I know full well that I have no good excuse whatsoever for being completely silent about this until now. Nothing I was going through was so great that it could have forced me to be utterly silent for as long as I have. The very least I could have done is leave some kind of message explaining what was going on with me on my video comments, or in the Discord server. Just something, anything, somewhere, where everyone could see it. It probably would have only taken me anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes for me to do so, depending on how much I wanted to divulge at the time. It would have been relatively quick and easy, and I could have then focused my attention elsewhere, without feeling guilty about leaving everyone in the dark in the back of my mind for months on end. And you guys would have had at least some clear idea of what was going on, and not have to sit around wondering what the hell happened to me. Wondering why it's taking so long to see anything new come from me. I wouldn't have had to waste anybody's time waiting for stuff that I couldn't give a surefire delivery date on, or wasted anyone's time worrying whether or not I was even alive and well. But I didn't do any of this because, in short, I couldn't be bothered to. Because I was too busy dealing with my own problems and trying to maintain stability in my personal life to do something as simple and basic as that. It doesn't matter what I was going through, or how it impacted my state of mind at the time. None of it justifies how I ultimately ended up handling this whole affair in relation to all of you guys, my viewers and subscribers. Which brings me to the most important thing that I really want to say to all of you, here and now. Words can't express to you how truly sorry I am for having handled all this the way that I have. Again, as far as I'm concerned, I have no good excuse for it. It didn't need to happen this way. I could have done the absolute bare minimum for you guys, and I couldn't work up the drive to do at least that much. And I kept this period of absolute silence going for close to 2 years at this point. All because I didn't want to face up to this colossal screw-up on my part that I could have easily prevented if I just did what I should have originally done, and just sit down for a few minutes and explain myself to all of you. Instead, I just kept burying my head in the sand, ignored this particular problem of my own creation, and focused on anything else but this. And I deeply regret all of it. What I've done here wasn't fair to any of you. I don't know what else I can say or do, but keep telling you that I'm well and truly sorry. I'm deeply ashamed of myself for how long I've stayed silent about this up until now. I hope more than anything that those of you who have been a part of my audience for any length of time can forgive me for my foolishness, but I understand if you can't. What I've done here isn't something I feel that this one apology of mine can make up for. If it's possible for me to win back any of your guys' trust, I will do what I can on my end to do just that. Now, regarding the future of my channel and my content, I'll be straight with you. As of this point in time, my personal life has changed drastically in the time I've been absent from the wider internet at large. My schedule in real life is the busiest it's ever been, and it doesn't leave me with as much downtime as I used to have back during my peak in content creation. I hate leaving projects unfinished, and I truly want to resume both my Higurashi and the Devil on G-String series of Let's Plays, but given my current lifestyle and schedule, I'd be forced to change the frequency in which I deliver new content compared to how I used to, even though I'm certain I could produce new videos in a similar level of quality compared to my most recently completed ones. and perhaps continue to find ways to gradually improve their quality over time. It just wouldn't be possible for me to deliver the same quantity of content that I could back then. Unless I can figure something out on my end to help overcome this limitation without affecting the other areas of my life too much, it just won't be possible for me to pump out a similar volume of content that I was previously maintaining. No matter what I do, if I were to get back into making videos, something is inevitably going to have to change in order to make everything else work. I hate to have to tell you guys all this, especially after having just apologized for my noticeable lack of anything over the past almost 2 years at this point. But this is the reality of things with me as they are now. My lack of communication on how my personal life could or is potentially affecting my ability to do this kind of work is what caused this mess to begin with. And since I don't want to repeat that mistake, I'm going to try to be upfront and honest with you guys about this stuff, no matter how unpleasant it may be for me to share at times. Especially now. Once again, words cannot express how sorry I am for all of this. My sudden disappearance, me coming back to apologize for it after all this time, only to tell you all immediately after that if I get back into content creation, I'm going to be giving less content compared to the amount I used to make. I really don't know for sure what else I can say or do at this point to make any of this any better. I'm trying my best here. Truly. I hope that my efforts will be enough, and that you guys can forgive me for all of this, and that I can earn your trust again. Whatever ends up happening with this channel for sure, whether I get back into making regular new content or not, whether I try something new or not, I want to move past all of this. I want to now focus on being better instead of being sorry, and get back to work. I hope that I can still continue to see and interact with some of you who may still be around even after all this time, and start providing new content of some kind for you guys to enjoy somewhere down the road. But if you want to move on or already have moved on from me, I'll understand. If there is any of you who are going to continue sticking around to see what I do for the future, then I'll see you guys on my next videos for Higurashi and the Devil on G-String, whenever I can get those out, as well as anything else I put out in the future. I still have the raw recordings for the next episodes that I never got around to editing and publishing, but I'm going to need time to refamiliarize myself with DaVinci Resolve, since I haven't messed with that program in any serious capacity since my last few published videos. I don't want to leave those 2 series unfinished, but I don't want to sacrifice the level of quality I had achieved with my videos prior to my absence, if at all possible. I want to, at the very least, try and finish them both, with the amount of care that they deserve, before I determine where I should go from there. In the meantime, I'll try and stay in touch with all of you, and answer any questions you may have, as well as give any further updates as necessary. I almost forgot to mention this. For those of you who are wondering, don't worry, I'm in a much more stable place in my personal life right now. Things have more or less completely stabilized for me. While I was going through that especially rough period in my life, I got in touch with my family back home and explained my situation to them. And they were able to eventually help me get back to my home across the country with them. Since then, I've been slowly picking up the pieces of my life any way I could. I've been building back up my financial savings, and I've been going to the gym more often than I ever have up until that point, and I'm in the best shape of my life. I look great, I feel great. I didn't need to take any therapy or anything like that. All I really needed, it seemed, was just some time to focus on myself and building myself back up under my own terms, at my own pace, and then just going from there. I was able to keep my day job by getting a transfer to a branch local to my hometown, and within less than a week I was back working and didn't have to worry about any serious lost income shortly after coming back. I'm also slowly but surely building a new social circle for myself, so I'm not completely isolated from anybody outside of my immediate family. Despite the hardships I was facing towards the last month or so in the last place I was living at, I was able to ultimately pack up my stuff, get everything shipped over across the country, back home, and been slowly picking up the pieces from there. I could go on, but the important thing is I'm alright. In a lot of ways, I'm more alright than I have been in a long time. I mean, things aren't 100% copacetic. I mean, when are they ever? But compared to what I was dealing with before, it's literal night and day, and I just feel the difference. Especially now that I've been back home for a little over a year now. I've had some time to licking all the wounds I had accumulated over the course of several years prior to me moving back home. Things aren't 100% perfect, but they're good. And to me, that's the very least I could ask for. As things currently stand, all around I'm as well off as I could hope to be. And I'm looking toward the future with more optimism than I've had in a long while. Anyway, with all that out of the way, take care, guys.